Chapter 38. Nanthornin approached the injured mudman, touching his wounds. Bago howled in pain, feeling an indescribable, soul-sucking pain. Standing next to him, David, who could barely stand on his feet, looked at it with tears in his eyes. Jelif held the sobbing Turhan in her arms, trying to calm the boy down. They were now in a cluttered room leading upstairs. "In such a state, you will not even be able to go," said the warrior glumly. "What are we going to do? We can't leave him here. We don't even have time." The princess broke down. "I don't know what's going on with my father right now. What if the wormers or those Paguirians killed him?" she added after a while, sitting helplessly on one of the scattered furniture. "Everyone certainly already knows that we are here. The king is certainly dead," she continued, trying to stop her crying. "Don't say that, princess. Remember what I told you. Never stop believing. Every moment of doubt is the same like a moment of weakness. True power cannot exist without faith in oneself and in one's purpose." The giant replied to her, "Believe. There is no longer any need or what to believe. We will release my father if he is still alive, and then what? Soon the sun will rise. The sun has already risen. We will not be able to get out of this cursed city in any way. I sincerely regret that I grew up here. I regret every day when—" The girl suddenly interrupted the sentence, due to her sudden burst of crying. Jelif approached her and embraced, saying to her, "And I don't regret anything, my dear. It has been an honor for me to serve you for so many years, my princess. I have taken care of you since you was a child, carrying you in my arms like a mother, and I know that your father loves you with all his heart for a reason. I clearly remember that moment when your father promised you a throne under dominion. He knew he didn't need a son. He knew perfectly well that you would inherit the throne from him, for he sincerely believed in you. He has seen throughout these 18 years how brave, capable, strong and wise you are. He simply believed that it was you, and no one else, who would be worthy to replace his place after his death. So if, my queen, your father was able to believe in you so much, what prevents you from believing in yourself too?" Hearing this, the archer threw herself around her nanny's neck, asking in a strangled voice, "And do you believe in me?" "We all believe in you," Nanthornin said, smiling at her. The princess also involuntarily smiled at the great heroess. "I've already told you that humans created monsters. I have also told you that only humans are able to overcome them, but I have not told you that the same applies to faith and doubt. Only people can kill doubt in themselves and believe in themselves. No one else can do it for them." "And what do you think? What makes a person really believe in himself?" the warrior asked at the end. Everyone stood in silence, wondering what could be answered. Nanthornin, seeing that no one was speaking for a long time, began to continue his statement. "A man thinks he is weak because when he stumbles, he falls. When he splits himself, he bleeds, and when he bleeds out, he dies. People don't believe in themselves because they only see what they see with their eyes, but they don't see what's inside their hearts. They don't see what's hidden in their minds. Faith is not about trusting your body or your abilities. True faith comes from our pain and tears. For what is faith in oneself when you see no obstacle before you? How can you believe in yourself when you don't see your purpose? Then you don't have to believe. Open your hearts to what you love, and then look at what limits you. I don't think I need to tell you that true faith is what you don't see, not what you see. But if you see these two things, you will have the true faith in yourself. You will then see your obstacle, but you will also be able to see your purpose in your heart. Then nothing will limit you. When others tell you that something will go wrong because something seems impossible, do not listen, but close your eyes and find your dreams and purpose. Then you will continue to stumble, but you will rise. You will bleed, but your wounds will be healed. You will die, but you will come back to life. Your weaknesses will only make you more strong. When you don't believe, even the smallest of obstacles can be the biggest problem for you. If you fail, don't tell yourself that you can't do it. Make you see that you can do it. Even evil itself can be stopped by men, but they do not know that they could be capable of it. They just don't believe that something you can't see can be overcome. They only see what their eyes are saying. People are evil and sinful by nature because they do not believe that it can be otherwise. Notice that people today only believe in what is seen, but not in what is not seen, and this is the biggest mistake they make. Not only that, they are inclined to believe lies rather than themselves. Belief in what is visible is blank, and belief in what the human eye cannot see is much greater. The world you're seeing now will become different as soon as you believe in what is not there. Your body will know no limitations, for your heart and mind will know no limitations. That's what miracles are all about. Miracles are not a coincidence, it can only arise if you believe in it. When Nanthornian finally finished his long speech, everyone looked at him with smiles on their faces. Even Bago, lying on the table, allowed himself to smile slightly. The warrior looked at the wounded comrade and then touched his wounds again. When he did it, to everyone's amazement, the wounds on the mudman's body began to disappear unexpectedly. After a while, Bago jumped off the table, looking in disbelief at his grey skin. He no longer even has any pain or feeling of weakness. Faith can be like magic, said the warrior again. However, to believe, we do not need any great power that comes from the evil itself, but even weakness, our tears that show darkness what we care about, and what we love. Miracles come precisely from faith, and it is something great. When he said this, he helped Bago to get back on his feet, and let you know that nothing will stop us anymore, the warrior added. Lord Hendron was watching his mighty army, standing at the very top of the rocky hill. At the bottom was the great city of Nemesis, and just behind it stood a huge castle, belonging to this powerful town. At his side stood also the lord of the city and his closest subjects. Is your army also ready for the march, Lord Minthriel? The army has been stationed here in the city for many days, but still no news from the capital. We can't set out while we're still in uncertainty, and unfortunately I'm increasingly unsure whether we can save the king. Our only hope now is in Nanthornian. Lord Hendron did not finish his speech, because in the corner of his eye he suddenly saw Minthriel squinting his eyes, as he were trying to see something in the light of the rising sun. Someone is going here, said a copper-haired man, pointing Hendron to the 5 newcomers, climbing along a stony path. As soon as they approached, the 2 lords recognized 4 of them at once. A few heroes came to us in the company of Metkel, but the 5th one, do you know who he is, Lord Hendron? Minthriel asked. No, I have no idea who he is, but he looks to me like, rather, it must be some shadow warrior, said the green-eyed lord, only when 5 newcomers stopped a few meters in front of him. Your lordship, majesty, Metkel said, bowing slightly before his ruler. What is all about Metkel? Hendron asked casually. I would like to tell you, my lord, that this man, he says, claim that Nanthornian's team has already arrived and is probably already in the royal palace. Hearing this, the 2 lords exchanged uncertain glances to each other. What's your name? Hendron finally asked, a young man dressed in black armor. Others called me Shtendrim Lord. I am Shadow Warrior. I don't even have a surname and place of birth. But maybe let's get straight to the point, Shtendrim, the Lord interrupted him, and then turned out to the 3 heroests. One of them was Turgene, but the other 2, Lord did not know. And did this Shadow Warrior tell you anything? He asked Turgene. Yes, it is. Me and my comrades, Alcha and Mikhail, also received a lot of evidence from this young man that he had actually accompanied Nanthornian's team for some time. He told us that the team had already arrived in the city some time ago, so he took the mount of one of them and got here as soon as possible to tell us about it. Hearing this, Lord looked at the young man in black armor with his research eyes and he sighed. Oh well, rather, you tell us the truth, youth, but we still do not know if Nanthornian has already reached the palace itself. Unfortunately, we are still not sure if they succeeded, and sending scouts there would be rather too risky. Shtendrim decided that Hendron was right. Even he himself could not tell if the team had already reached its destination. Or has Nanthornian already managed to save the king? Or will he even die? I really don't know how we could find it out. The Lord was still worried. I believe, Hendron, that they will succeed. You, too, should not lose hope, Lord, Turgene said suddenly. Yes. That's right, but that doesn't mean that the king is safe anymore. We cannot attack the capital when we are not sure. I am still afraid for our ruler Turgene, and nothing will change that. It is good that we have a powerful army, and when the siege will occurs, we will kill all these creatures. Not a single one of these monsters will remain in our country, shouted at the end Hendron. Minthriel, who heard this, laughed. Just remember, my friend, to stick to your plan. We cannot throw ourselves at the enemy with all our might. We will lure these monsters out of the city and treat them with our archers and our Hessian artillery. Then the Astrians will break through the canal into the city, opening the gates. Then we will also let our cavalry in, and we will introduce Juratic machines under the walls, and then, what will be next? Minthriel asked, embarrassed. Then, we will make mincemeat of the enemy, With all our might, we will burn houses and destroy the streets of our city if necessary. We will free our country, even if we have to give our lives for it," Hendron said, but suddenly out of the corner of his eye he saw that the ginger-haired lord was not paying attention to him. Hendron, not knowing what was going on, looked in the same direction with the others, and some flickering light appeared to his eyes coming from the north. It was only when the mysterious object approached the city, emerging from behind a nearby hill, that he found that these were numerous Narketchan troops. Immediately behind the Narketchans marched also the army of Jurita and Astria. "So everyone has already arrived. I think we can set off today, my lord," Metkul said. "Nope, these are not everyone yet. Look," Alcha suddenly cried, pointing a little further, in a northeast direction. They all looked in the direction indicated, and another mysterious army appeared before their eyes. Hendron involuntarily bulked his eyes, seeing the glow of silver and red. "They are Antharians. After all, King Sivogmund did not promise us any support," he said after a while, looking at hundreds, if not thousands of riders, riding armed horses. Red banners held above reflected the glow of the rising sun. "Now, with such a large army, we will be able to retake the capital. Even if Antheria itself decided to help us, nothing will stop us." Lord began to scream suddenly like a crazy. Minthri looked at him strangely, and they poked him on the shoulder. Hendron immediately calmed down, then looked again towards the four armies approaching the brick walls of Nemesis. When the golden gate was opened and the soldiers stepped in, the smile disappeared from his face, for he knew that many of these soldiers would no longer see their families and homes. People in the city began to go out into the street and raise triumphant shouts, and throw flowers from the windows of tall, colorful houses. "My soldiers say that they are ready to die for the further fate of the kingdom. I sincerely fear that many of them, and perhaps even myself, will not return to their homes. I'm honestly afraid I might die in this battle," Hendron said quietly. "Why do you think, Lord, that you can die? Do you doubt yourself?" Turgeon asked. "After all, during a fight, anyone can die. This is the nature of war. People are dying and they will die. There are thousands of monsters in the capital. Why do you even ask me such idiotic questions, Hero Est?" The man was outraged. "Because I see that you doubt in your victory, Lord. We Hero Ests draw our strength from faith. Know that every moment of doubt is equal to a moment of weakness, my friend. If you doubt yourself, you will surely perish." Turgeon replied. Hearing this, Hendron snorts only in response, nodding sarcastically. "Our brotherhood, from time immemorial, has been learning to control its weaknesses," Alja said after a while. "Faith is precisely the force that allows a man to be a true warrior. When we stumble during a fight, we rise, and when we bleed, our wounds are healed," he added after a while. Now the Lord could no longer listen to it. "You heroists are really, to put it mildly, strange. You are hiding from the rest of the world in your frozen stone fortress. You think that behind these mountains of yours is the very end of the world, and now you want to tell me, light-eyed warrior, that man can be immortal by faith." "I didn't say that," said the dark-haired warrior. "Really? So what did you mean when you said, when we bleed during a fight, our wounds are healed?" "I apologize to you if you didn't say it literally, but if you told me it seriously, I tell you right away that nothing but only magic itself can heal wounds during your fight. But surely you know, Lord, that magic is strictly forbidden here, and the practice of magic threatens with death. It is nothing than just a power came from ancient, elven deities," Alcha replied. Hendron looked directly into his dark eyes, then growled unpleasantly. "You don't have to remind me, warrior, what magic is. You are already beginning to irritate me with your teaching. You are probably already trying to convert me to your nonsensical beliefs. Even Nanthonin himself never told me such nonsense. I don't even remember him ever leading me to such a state. Get out of here better and give me a break." The three heroists, however, did not budge. "We're not going anywhere. We also want to serve our homeland," Mikhail said. "Did you say your homeland?" Lord asked, staring directly at Heroest's face, shaded by a navy blue hood. Minthriel looked at the whole scene without knowing what to think about it. Suddenly, he twitched when he heard Hendron's sudden scream. "After all, the mountains of the south do not belong to Athanestra. They do not belong to anyone. You are just a bunch of strangers, wanderers from different lands who are hiding in these frozen mountains. You are not even one of us." "Antheria also does not belong to the nation of four countries," Mikhail said. Hearing this, the Lord went into a real frenzy. I don't care. Antheria is in alliance with us, and just because you work with us doesn't mean you have the right to be here. You are not one of us and you never will be. Even Nanthornian himself, who is supposed to be your leader, seems to understand this, so get out of here as soon as possible, before I will chase you off from here by force. We want to stay here, Turgeon replied calmly. Hearing this, the Lord tried to calm down, and then he asked the golden-haired warrior. Okay, so you still think you're an Ephenesian? Yes, so tell me then where you come from? From Ephenestia, replied the light-eyed warrior. But where were you born? Asked the Lord again. In Ephenestia, replied the warrior again. Hendron sighed and then turned to Ulcha. And from where do you come from? I come from Molia. I came to Ephenestia as a little boy, answered the warrior dressed in red and gold. Hearing this, the Lord smiled at them goofy. So you warrior, you yourself have admitted that you are not of our blood. Even you, Turgeon, are no longer from here. You have left our country for your brotherhood. Get out of here. Ulcha, however, approached the Lord, saying to him, the fact that I come from Molia means nothing. I feel like an Ephenestian and I want to serve my country. Really Moliarian, everyone can get citizenship here even for money. You can leave from here as soon as possible, after I will lose patience and call my guards. Minthriel, who heard this, was surprised, because the castle and all the guards around it belonged only to him, and Hendron now had no one but his ordinary soldiers. But Metkel, seeing his angry ruler, spoke to Turgeon, for he knew him well and they were friends. Please, Turgeon, you can really leave this place, it's not your fight. The three heroes exchanged glances. Shtendrim looked at them with tension, expecting an answer. We're not going to go anywhere, we are ready to shed our blood for the further fate of our homeland, Ulcha finally replied. Shtendrim twitched and swallowed his saliva, seeing Hendron's face seething with anger. After a while, however, the Lord's face changed its appearance, and his eyes expanded again in surprise. The Shadow Warrior, seeing the strange behavior of the Lord, looked behind him, and some mysterious figures appeared before his eyes, emerging one at a time from behind the backs of the three heroists. After a while, he stated that they were all the same light-haired warriors. The entire brotherhood, consisting of more than 30 heroes, was armed with their swords, axes and warhammers, and wore helmets and other headgear on their heads. They were all dressed in light robes or mighty armor, and they wore various pendants around their necks. Lord Hendron, like everyone else, recoiled in terror, seeing so many light-eyed warriors at once for the first time. Minthriel, unlike Hendron, smiled involuntarily at the sight of them. Metkel looked at his stunned ruler and asked, "Do you still want my lord?" The man did not finish his speech. Hearing Hendron's reply, "No, I have nothing left to say, just give me peace of mind in the end. We'll be leaving the city of Nemesis tonight." Chapter 39. The broken window opposite the corridor let in the glow of the rising sun. Nanthornian knelt on the ground, looking at the dried red spot. "Human blood," said the warrior, then got up from the ground and looked towards the winding stairs. When he nodded slightly, the other members of the team came out from behind the wall. When Nanthornian clung to the wall next to it, they began to come out of hiding one by one, sneaking cautiously towards the warrior. When everyone was at the wall, they began to come closer and closer to the ajar, oak door. Although heroes had already removed the arrows from David's body and inexplicably removed his wound, the boy still felt weak. He knew that they were still not safe anywhere and at any moment something or someone could assault them. In addition, the boards creaking under his feet made him shiver, with the thought that all this could be heard. When Nanthornian finally came closer to the door, he gestured his comrades to stop, and then glanced through the narrow gap in the door. His assumptions were confirmed. In the room behind the wall lay a dead, smelly body on the ground. In addition, right next to them, there was one of the Pagunians standing as a guard, who did not seem to care about this fact. Apparently, no one even found the time to remove the corpse from the floor, and no one was bothered by the stench of the old body. The Black Knight stood only motionless next to the door, with a halberd in his hand. Nanthornian looked around the rest of the room and, finding that no one else was there, suddenly tugged violently at the door, crushing the guard against the wall. Pagunian screams not so much in pain, but in surprise, and then swings his weapon at the warrior. However, the latter warrior deflected the blow with his bracelet, and then grabbed him by the arm, and with the other hand he grabbed his leg, throwing the soldier straight to the ground. When Pagunian was on the floor, the warrior grabbed an Isletian saber and drove it straight into the crack in his helmet. Hero Est pulled out his weapon from the throat of his opponent and suddenly jumped off the ground, stretching his hearing. Behind the door in front of him, a strange, quiet sound could be heard, which was getting louder with each passing moment. Suddenly, they opened, and several more Pagurians ran inside, accompanied by a squeaking swarm of goblins and wormers. They all stopped in an instant, looking at the black-haired man with a weapon in his hand. No one even knew who they were dealing with now. As soon as the first of the Black Knights attacked the warrior with his sword, the mysterious warrior avoided the blow by grabbing the blade of his weapon with his bare hand. After a while, he bounced off the ground, after which he drove a saber into the side of Pagurian. When the enemy slumped dead to the ground, another of the soldiers managed to hit Hero Est's weapon with his long mace, severing it from his hand. Nanthornian began to look at his lying weapon motionless, looking as if he was about to surrender. The Pagurian, seeing the warrior protruding motionlessly, swung his powerful weapon at him, but when the mace was inches from Hero Est's head, the warrior would retreat backwards, avoiding the fatal blow, and then stuck his fingers into the Black Knight's armor. Two more Pagurians tried to approach him from behind, but the raider, with the back of his head, slammed the helmet of one of them, and then turned to them on his heel, hitting his opponent on the chin. The last of the Pagurians raised his axe, so Hero Est was forced to fall to the ground. When he did it, the opponent's great axe slammed into the wooden floor, and the warrior slammed him straight into his helmet. Pagurian screamed in pain, but after a while he left his weapon, avoiding another blow. Hero Est, however, with his own foot, lifted the saber from the ground and kicked the weapon towards the man, so hard, that it stuck in his chest like an arrow, directly into the place where the mysterious symbol was located. When the four Pagurians were already lying on the ground, the monsters looked in horror directly into the face of the mysterious warrior. After a while, his eyes shone again with a golden glow, striking the monsters in the eyes. The wild eyes suddenly began to burn out, and the other goblins and vermers, who did not look the warrior in the face, decided that this man must have some mysterious power in the fight against the monsters. All creatures, knowing that they certainly did not have to deal with an ordinary opponent, began to flee and panic, straggling in all directions. "What are you fools doing? You have to fight. Do not allow a man to get to the ruler," one of them howled. Some of the monsters obeyed the order, but immediately regretted it. As soon as the goblins surrounded a warrior from every possible angle, the warrior began to chop them mercilessly into pieces like vegetables. His fighting style, reminiscent of a bloody dance, would have seemed fatal to him, given that every now and then he exposed his back to attack, but none of the monsters, as always, was not able to even scratch him. The saber pierced the air with a loud whistling, and his nimble hands curled it as if he were holding a rotor blade in his hand. All the spears of the monsters began to fall in pieces, and the terrified creatures again rushed to escape. They knew full well that they had no chance, so they opened the door to escape through the corridor from the light-eyed warrior. When they did it, however, the arrows of Jellyfess and Celian were shot into their bodies. After a while, the whole team burst inside, and the monsters realized that the only way to escape now led to the top. The same wormer, who had previously ordered other monsters to fight, was the first to run with a squeak to the winding stairs. Nanthornian, however, had no intention of leaving even one monster alive and snatched the bow straight from the scout's hands. After a while, he rammed the slammed door, running up the stairs, with which several enemies escaped. Although the stairs were winding and the wormers were behind the wall, the warrior tightened the bow and then shot straight at the concave wall in front of him. The arrow bounced off the curve of the wall, spiked into two enemies. Running after Hero Est, Celian bulked his eyes, not knowing what to think about it all. Most clearly this mysterious warrior, whatever weapon he would take into his hands, would still turn out to be a master in the use of it. Nanthornian grabbed the second arrow, pulling the bowstring, then aimed at the wall again. Another arrow also bounced off the concave walls, and after a while they could hear the monsters screaming again. When he reached the lying corpses, he pulled out arrows from their bodies and after a while he ran into a huge room. "They're running towards the king's bedroom," cried the princess suddenly, seeing a familiar place. The warrior looked to his left, seeing the other three escaping creatures, so he threw an arrow at them, killing one of them, but the other two hid behind the bend of the corridor at the very end of the room. Hero Est gave the bow to the owner, and then set off in a frantic run towards the escapees. He turned right, entering a long corridor, and his eyes appeared to the monsters, which were already closing the door behind him. Immediately afterwards, they managed to slam them behind them when Nanthornin was already halfway there. The stupid monsters already thought that they had escaped, but quickly changed their minds as soon as the door was suddenly raised to the ground. A light-eyed warrior stepped in and began to slowly approach them. "Don't come any closer, Evanescent scum." Not a step further, one of the wormers began to scream, and then jumped on the bed next to him, knocking down a man tied with ropes. The overpowered, sheet-wrapped unfortunate man turned out to be no one else but the king himself. The second monster put the ruler on his knees, and then put a knife to his neck. "Don't want to get closer, otherwise we'll kill your king. Do not come closer." The human lit. Nanthornin stopped, but the expression on his face did not indicate anything he feared. The creatures, who saw this, claimed that nothing could stop this mysterious warrior anyway. Undoubtedly, he considered them only as a simple problem that should be disposed of. One of the monsters was about to howl in despair, but he didn't even manage to do it, because suddenly Hardrocks would stretch out his hand in front of him and with some supernatural power twisted their necks. Two wormers fell limply to the ground, and after a while the other members of the team ran inside. Pupin, seeing the king lying on the ground, with his mouth covered with shawl and wrapped in a sheet banded with ropes, rushed towards him. "What have they done to you, my friend?" shouted the halfling. "Your friend?" Jalafessa was surprised to hear it. After a while, she wanted to say something else, but as soon as Pupin untied the gagged mouth of the king Hurin, the ruler began to shout at once, "Pupin, Jalafessa, you must all flee from here, it's a trap. Soon they will be here." And the king did not finish his speech, because suddenly a whole bunch of Pagunians armed to the teeth ran inside. There may have been about 40 of them, and all of them stretched their weapons towards the burglars, surrounding them from all sides. Nanthornin was about to take up his weapon, but after a while, one of the blades of black and gold swords found itself just below his throat. The others also put their weapons to their necks, preventing them from attacking, so the warrior, like everyone else, did not dare to shake. "Did you really think we're going to let you get away from here so easily?" suddenly laughed a male voice belonging to one of the Black Knights, which looked to them as some more important person. Unlike other soldiers, he had more gold in his armor, and on his neck he was hung with a chain, medallion, resembling a human hand. In addition, a black outline of the eye was also engraved on the golden hand. The mysterious Pagunian approached Hardrocks with a proud, slow step, and then stopped right in front of him. "I didn't think I could capture you so easily. Sorry, but I have to disappoint you, dear ones." When he said this, he stopped in front of the king lying on the ground, reaching for his huge axe. The princess, who saw this, began to thrash, but after a while she remembered that right next to her throat there was a black blade of a sword. "Don't you dare touch my father, you monster!" she screamed. Pagunian, who heard this, looked at her, mumbling something under his breath, but the expression on his face could not be seen through his helmet. "We no longer need a king, my dear. I'm really sorry you have to look at this. In addition, your whole journey was in vain. I'm really sorry to have to do this." When he said this, he lifted his weapon over the head of the bearded man. "No, please no, why are you doing this at all? Who exactly are you?" Jalafessa began to scream again, screaming in a frenzy. "We're a harbinger of a new, better world," replied the man, and then he swung his axe towards the king squirming on the floor. "No," the princess cried, closing her tear-flooded eyes, but just as the weapon was about to fall down, Nanthornin suddenly pushed one of the soldiers away, reaching for his shining jewel. After a while, he pulled it out in front of them, and in his hand appeared some light that wiped out all the opponents around. With some golden glow, a mysterious power spread throughout the room, and several Pagunians fell out of the windows. The others crashed into the walls around, smashing the furniture. A real hurricane appeared in the whole room, which began to sweep away everything in the immediate vicinity. The warriors' comrades, numbed in shock, seeing that nothing had happened to them and that their executioners were lying on the ground, quickly grabbed their weapons. After a while, however, the Pagunians got up and began to push in a frenzy on a gang of burglars. The warrior's eyes, which again shone with a golden glow, squinted angrily, and the saber in his hand began to wreak havoc again. One of the Black Knights tried to stab the light-eyed man in the chest, but their warrior again grabbed the blade with his hand, and in some inexplicably it did not even bleed. It was true that this heroist had hard paws, but the hand still looked as if it were completely indestructible. The warrior saw that some other opponent wanted to swing at him from the side, so he grabbed his weapon as well, twisting the soldier's hands in such a way that the soldier stabbed himself with his own weapon. Heroist's friends, who were fighting right behind him, suddenly noticed that a few Paguyrians cowardly began to run back towards the king lying on the floor. Jalafessa, seeing her father in danger, caught up with the heavily armed soldiers, and when they were about to kill the ruler, she put their heads between the bowstring and the arms of her bow. When she did it, she stabbed all three enemies with her long sword, and then cut the ropes that bound the king's body so that the king could get out of the wrapped sheets. David, defending himself next to him, suddenly heard Jalif screaming, so he looked towards the woman to see what was happening. He saw that the Paguyrians had attacked their elderly companion, trying to knock her off the window. After a while, however, they were prevented from doing so by a large muddy pour, which throwed off the enemies, who with a scream began to fall from almost the very top of the huge palace. Their screams became more and more silent with each meter down, until his screams finally died down completely. One of the Paguyrians who managed to catch onto the window frame escaped with his life, still trying to throw Jalif down, but Bago hit him right in the face and the man slumped off the windowsill. Celian, defending himself right next to the broken window, was surrounded by three opponents, but David helped him get out of the trap by approaching them from behind. The boy looked back towards the fighters until he heard someone scream again. After a while, he saw a mudman falling to the ground, to which one of the soldiers suddenly jumped. Paguyrian lifted his mace to deal a fatal blow to the skinny guy, but Bago quickly hid under the bed, dodging the powerful weapon. The Paguyrian, unable to catch his victim, jumped on the furniture, beating a large mattress with his mace in a frenzy. Cordrin, seeing the angry soldier, took the opportunity to stick his sword straight into his back. Paguyrian finally stopped tossing and turned limply on the white bedding, flooding it all with the stain of the blood. David, seeing that nothing had happened to anyone, looked again towards the bright warrior. He stated that they had to defeat about 10 opponents. Heroist fought, of course, like a killing machine, but the boy twitched suddenly, seeing after a while the same Paguyrian throwing himself at him suddenly, with a golden hand hanging around his neck. A black knight in a wild frenzy brandished his axe, hitting Heroist. Finally, he managed to hit the warrior's saber with his heavy weapon, severing it from his hands. Everyone stopped fighting, watching as after a while the commander of the Paguyrians sticks a moment later the sharpened tip of the weapon into the foot of the warrior. Heroist cried in pain, looking at his wounded leg. After a while, Paguyrian was struck straight at the black golded helmet, but it did not make any impression on him. He kicked the light-eyed man straight in the stomach, which made the warrior fall to his knees, and then the soldier threw his gold chain around his neck. He tightened it so tightly that Heroist began to choke slowly. Suddenly, his eyes shone brightly again, but the Black Knights, seeing this, began to kick the warrior straight in the face. Heroist's comrades, who saw this, watched in horror as Paguyrian tightened his chain tighter around the warrior's neck. The glow in his eyes disappeared again, and he began to squirm on the floor, unable to draw air into his lungs. "Leave alone our friend, you psychopath!" David shouted furiously, throwing himself at the big man. The man, however, without the slightest problem threw the boy off himself, and then tore a luminous jewel from Nanthornin's neck. "I really thank you for coming to us, light-eyed warrior. It's just a pity that I can't repay you for this help." Something was good, he laughed, picking up from the demolished bed, detached, wooden rung. Celian, knowing what is going to happen, wanted to shoot Paguyrian, but one of his soldiers ran to him and hit him in the stomach. The commander of the Black Knights lifted a thick piece of wood above his head to complete his work. The last thing the warrior saw in front of him was a wooden rung hitting his head. David, seeing Nanthornin unconscious, went berserk again, wanting to kill the Dark Knight, but suddenly something heavy also hit the side of his head. Everything was darkened before the boy's eyes, and after a while nothing could be seen but impenetrable darkness. When the boy fell to the ground, the remaining Paguyrians surrounded the rest of the burglars, reaching for their weapons. No one dared to resist them anymore. Jalafessa threw away her bow and then looked angrily at the 30 Paguyrians. "You will pay us for it, you fanatics, monsters, you are monsters." She began to scream straight into their faces, until she was hit. straight into her own face. She touched her blue cheek and then measured them with a mocking and angry look. Nanthornian woke up, taking air into his lungs. He was in a large, dark room, chained to a stone wall. In addition, a white shirt was torn off his body, which made the cold spread all over his skin, getting goosebumps. He looked around and, finding that he could not see anything, strained his mind to light up his surroundings a little with his eyes. When he did so, behind the bars of his cell he saw a huge dungeon and cramped cages hanging from the ceiling, where his companions were. Jalafessa, standing in one of them, seeing the warrior's eyes shining in the darkness, cried out to him, "They locked us up here about half an hour ago, they'll probably be back here soon. Why is there such a draft here? I'm getting sick from this rocking." David groaned, tugging at the bars of the mercilessly cramped cage. "Be quiet, I think I can hear them already," Nathan said. His assumptions were confirmed when everyone heard a sound from the gagged prison door. The warriors' eyes took on their original blue color again, and a moment later, the Paguyrians entered the interior in the company of several Asletian pirates. Oddly enough, even though Nanthornian no longer illuminated the room with his eyes, it became bright again, though no one was holding even a torch or a lamp in his hand. After a while, however, the team found out from where this mysterious light comes from. The commander of the Paguyrians hung a luminous jewel of Hero-est right next to his gold medallion, pulling it out in front of him to look more closely at his prisoners. He laughed unpleasantly, then looked at his soldiers. The two Asletians standing next to them, however, did not laugh with them. They were surprised that among the locked prisoners was their own general, Mettens. The pirates exchanged surprised glances and then turned to Paguyrian, speaking in his language, wanting him to explain it to them. "Demar Aaron guard Creamhead, Derad Tidaran," said one of the pirates, asking why their commander was behind the bars. Hearing this, the Black Knight turned violently towards him, as if surprised. "Garrod Creamhead?" he asked in response. Hearing this, the two Asletians nodded affirmatively. The Paguyrian who saw this mumbled something under his breath, grabbing his helmet, and then did something terrifying. He pulled out his black and gold dagger from behind his waist and stabbed one of the men right in the chest. The second of the terrified pirates was just trying to understand what had just happened to his companion, until he did not slump himself dead to the ground, with a blade in his own throat. Chapter 40. The Black Knight pulled out his dagger from the body of the Asletian and then approached Nanthornian's cell. He looked directly into the black-haired warrior's face and said, "It's really a shame that you won't get out of here. You helped me so much, and I'm still forced to do all of it." When he said this, he turned back towards the hanging cages. Grabbing his keys, he ordered one of his men to give a ladder, and then he leaned it against the column next to it so that he could get to the prisoners. "Wait, what do you want to do?" Jalafessa became concerned. Hearing this, Paguyrian took off his helmet, showing them his face. Everyone shuddered at the sight, but not out of horror, but out of sheer disbelief. The Black Knight had unusually beautiful eyes of blue color, while his hair was literally golden, styled in curls, but only one thing didn't fit on his face, which was a long scar under his right eye. Paguyrian has not yet climbed to the top of the ladder and he just smiled at the princess. "Don't worry, cute beauty, you will be fine, not unless your friend, Nanthornian, answers my important questions." When he said this, he opened the cage in which Mettens was. The Asletian, seeing the corpses of his fellow tribesmen lying downstairs, was of course immediately disturbed. Paguyrian, seeing that the other one was resisting, said, "Relax, Nanthornian will certainly not allow you to be harmed. I will only take you to him." The Asletian, seeing that he had no other choice, decided to go downstairs himself. His injured leg, however, suddenly slipped off the steps and the pirate fell to the ground with a moan. Paguyrian sighed at the sight and then reluctantly helped the other one to get up. When he did it, he looked at the pirate's leg. "Oh, nasty thing. Please sit here," said the Black Knight, bringing a wooden stool for him. Mettens sat down uncertainly, looking closely at Paguyrian. "Well, your pirates said you were their general. Does that mean your name is Mettens?" he began to ask the other one, of course all the time in the common language. Mettens nodded his head only tentatively in response. "So they were telling me the truth. I just don't know what you're doing here in this gang of burglars. Can you explain that to me?" Mettens sat in silence for a long time. Paguyrian, seeing that the pirate was not answering, showed him a luminous jewel hung around his neck, asking, "Or did this Hero-est promised you something in exchange for your help?" Nope, the pirate replied briefly. I wanted to escape from that cursed place and from you, he added after a while threateningly. The Black Knight grabbed his head, as if trying to calm down. So you wanted to betray us, so tell me why you wanted to do it. David, who was looking at all this, understood nothing of the foreign speech, but he knew that something bad was in the making. Answer me, the golden-haired man suddenly screamed, raising his clenched fist. Mettens covered himself instinctively with his hands, and then mumbled hastily. I didn't want to have anything to do with all of this anymore. You mean with what? Did you want to escape from our order? Even you, the Ascetians, are complete fools. We paid you tons of gold to work for us. Is this light-eyed garbage tell you something? Was he trying to convert you to his side? Did he tell you anything about the Golden Gate? Pagurian began to ask. The dark-haired pirate, of course, didn't even know what he meant. Leave him better, you monster. I didn't tell him anything about the gate. You know very well that I wouldn't do that, suddenly said Nanthonin's voice, coming from the dark cell. Exactly, leave our comrade, you over-aggressive licked bimbo. David began to yell in a frenzy. Hearing this, Pagurian burst into wild laughter, and then he kicked a stool, knocking Mettens to the ground. Have you heard it, little one? I felt sorry for him. He laughed at his soldiers. All Pagurians also began to laugh at the fair-haired boy. Okay, boy, my heart softened from your sweet, thin voice. Your beloved travel companion will be fine and I will bring someone else under the stool. The Black Knight still laughed, pointing towards the king. The princess, seeing that the soldiers were taking a ladder and opening her father's cage, began to shout. Leave him alone. What do you want from all of us? We just want to know something from you, replied the golden-haired man. There was a kind of euphoria in his voice, which did not herald anything good. When Pagurian threw the king out of the cage, the king fell from a few meters onto the stone ground. The half-gray-haired man rose up, and the Black Knight grabbed him tightly, placing him on a wooden stool. Please forgive me for my manners, your majesty. Maybe you would like to drink wine, after we start to catechize you? The ruler did not speak at all. He kept staring anxiously at the golden-haired man's face until he came to him after a while, with a cup filled to the brim, with red wine. Pagurian handed the silver vessel to the king directly to his hand, smiling to him unpleasantly. Horin thought that the wine might be poisoned, so he held the cup still in his hand. No wonder, this mysterious man recently tried to kill him. I prefer water, said a bearded man after a while, in a quiet voice. Hearing this, the Black Knight sighed and called someone by name, Caliphie. One of the men, dressed in a black golden cassock, with a cane in his hand, raised his head from the shadows. After a while, a hooded, mysterious individual approached the Pagurian, asking him what was going on. Our king is not happy with our wine. He's probably afraid of me. Could you give Caliphie water for him before we start working, please? Asked the Goldilocks man. Of course, let our great king drink and eat, replied the mysterious man with a smile, and then he touched the ground with the tip of his golden staff. When he did it, several of the lying stones turned into fragrant, fresh bread. The king wiped his eyes with terror until he suddenly saw that the man was also touching his silver chalice. Horin trembled once again, seeing the wine begin to transform in an inexplicable way, into pure water. Immediately afterwards, the sorcerer put the food on the other stool, bowing to the imprisoned ruler. The king touched the mysterious bread and stated that it must be real, but he didn't dare to make a bite, knowing that what he just saw was nothing but real magic. Eat and drink a little bit, our lord. The host should eat now, said the man in the cassock, again with a smile. Horin looked again at the tasty-looking bread and water, trying to stop himself. After a while, however, his hunger overcame, and when he was about to grab the cup and fresh food, something prevented him from doing so. The king released the vessel from his hands, pouring all the water on himself, and then he grabbed a rope that unexpectedly bound it around his neck. The man began to choke, and the sorcerer, seeing it, began to laugh wildly. Jolifessa began to cry and scream in a frenzy, and Nanthonin, seeing all this from the opposite direction, exclaimed, "Leave him, I'll tell you everything you want." Hearing this, however, the Pagurian tightened the rope tighter, on the throat of the ruler, saying, "So you'd better hurry up, Light-Aid. You have to tell us everything about your Golden Gate. We'll see now how much you care about the life of your beloved king, and I don't think you want to mourn him right away," he replied laughing. "You don't have access to that gate anyway. You are not in possession of it, Heroest replied. Oh, truly, that is a very pity, said Pagurian, pretending to cry. The rope tightened on the ruler's neck even tighter, and the body of the unfortunate man began to thrash. Nanthornin, who saw this, broke down, but after a while he began to shout. To open the gate you need my jewel, which you are already wearing, but you have no power over it. You won't be able to do anything with it. Hearing this, the golden-haired man loosened the embrace of the rope a bit, but he still wasn't going to give up. So I will be compelled to command you to open it, light-eyed messenger. We'll see if you'll be so tough then too, he growled, after which he ordered his men to chain the ruler to a chain hanging upwards. When they had done so, the Pagurian brutally grabbed the king and hung his hands up, into iron handcuffs, so that he would hang in the air. All of the prisoners froze motionlessly, seeing the man grabbing a long stick and begin to beat Horin's back. Lying next to Cage's Mertens, looked at it all, unable to do anything. The king, hanging a few centimeters above the ground, screamed in pain, and the chain swinging on all sides beat him against the wall next to him. "Stop doing it, you devil, stop," the princess screamed, helplessly tugging at the bars of her cramped cage. David, on the other hand, shook crouched, like jelly, with the impression that he was about to explode in rage. The Asclepian also wanted to pounce on the cruel fanatics, but he knew that in this way he would only make things worse. The pirate was quite helpless as well as the others, but suddenly he realized that no one was watching him. All of the Pagurians did not pay the slightest attention to him, literally as if they had forgotten that he was still here. So he looked around out of the corner of his eye, and a small metal thing appeared beside him, lying on the ground. So he looked at it carefully, and after a while he found that it was a silver wire that had broken away from the wooden stool foreshore. He looked around the Pagurians once, making sure no one could see him, and then grabbed it. With a lightning movement for the longitudinal thing, squeezing it in his hand, then he glanced at the dark cell next to him, wanting to see the warrior's face. Fortunately, Nanthornin was looking in his direction, as if knowing that Mertens had something to give for him. The dark-haired pirate carefully stretched out his hand in front of him, laying the metal wire as far as he could. Only a few centimeters remained for him to the steel bars of the cell, so Mertens decided to take a chance and approached a little, putting the object directly under the warrior's leg. Seeing this, Nanthornin drew this thing closer to him, with his wounded foot, and then again began to shout at the executioners, "Leave the king alone. If you want to open the gate, there is only one way you can access it, I'll tell you, but only if you leave the ruler." Hearing this, the golden-haired Pagurian stopped beating the king with his iron stick, turning into hearing. "Speak then," the man replied, but after a while he saw that the warrior was staring at the chains restraining the tortured prisoner. So when the Pagurian uncuffed his shackles and the king fell to the ground with a groan, Nanthornin finally began to say, "If you want to get access to the gate, you must first become its gatekeeper. You must become good to the world, otherwise this stone will destroy you. It does not come from this world, and you know perfectly well that it is not intended for you." When he said this, the Pagurian screamed unexpectedly in pain, feeling the luminous jewel begin to burn him. After a while, the jewel heated the steel armor to such an extent that he was forced to tear off the gold chain. "Am I supposed to be good?" the man snorted. "I'm good to this world," he finished. "Somehow I don't think so." Turhin also snorted, hearing this. "You'll regret it again. We'll see if tomorrow you will also resist me," Pagurian shouted in response, hiding the luminous jewel in the chest next to him. "Tonight I'll try to get you to tell us everything," cried still golden-haired man, approaching the exit door. When he opened it, all the soldiers began to leave the dark cell one by one, almost everyone. The team was worried by the fact that Calathi remained in the dungeon. A man in a cassock followed all 14 prisoners with his eyes, with an unpleasant smile on his face. Everyone thought that the hooded sorcerer would only keep an eye on them, but after a few hours they changed their minds when the hooded wizard unexpectedly approached Nanthornin's cell. Calathi grabbed his keys and opened the iron cage. When he had done so, he stepped in, pulling out his golden staff in front of him. "Well, light-eyed one, I hope you had some time to think and decided to tell us a little more about this gate, otherwise it will not end well, for your friends. I can learn something from them myself," laughed the wizard. "They know almost nothing about the gate. You won't learn anything from them," replied the warrior. "Oh really? You know very well that I can change it." Calathi snorted, then looked around at the prisoners, Surely one of them knows something more about the gate. We'll see who's in a minute, he added immediately afterwards, until he suddenly stopped his gaze on a fair-haired boy in a white sweatshirt. Or maybe that puppy. You probably care a lot about him, right? He asked at the end, seeing Hardrocks' worried face. After a while, he jumped up, approaching the hanging cages and raised the ladder to climb to the closed young man. When the monk opened only the narrow door, the boy immediately began to defend himself, beating the man on the head in a frenzy. The man, however, tugged the boy's hair, throwing him straight down. David, however, rose quickly, grabbing a wooden stool from the ground to beat his executioner. The sorcerer, however, pulled his golden staff out again in front of him, and white lightning bolts fired from its tip, which forced the boy to obey and surrender. After a while, the fanatic grabbed the boy's hood and began to drag him behind him, towards the warrior's cell. "Leave me alone, you sick jerk." Possessed, cranky in head, David did not finish his speech, because the sorcerer suddenly grabbed his head and told him to look straight into the eyes of Nan Thornin. "Now we will have some fun, Davy," Caliphate said. "How do you know my name?" The boy was terrified. "I read it from your friend's thoughts. I'm about to find out what you both know about this golden gate. You just have to look into his eyes," laughed the other one, and then he tore off his medallion from his neck, depicting the same mysterious golden hand that their commander wore. He put it straight under David's face, ordering to look at it, and with the other hand he pulled out his knife, forcing the boy to obey. "And now look at my medallion, Davy, all the time. Clear your mind and breathe calmly. In a tick it all will be over." When David heard this, he was horrified to find that he no longer had control over his body. A mysterious symbol hanging over his head began to approach his face, until suddenly it was transformed into a living hand. At least that's what the boy himself thought, who apparently was subjected to magic tricks. His mind, however, turned out to be stronger than magic, so David, contrary to the sorcerer's prohibitions, closed his eyes so as not to look at this terrible sight any longer. Caliphate, who was still trying to look into the boy's mind, found after a while that all his effort was in vain. Suddenly, he realized that this fair-haired boy was immune to magic. "He is a man from the other world, one of the chosen ones," he said after a while with horror, wanting to stick his knife directly into David's back, but he didn't notice, however, that the luminous warrior standing in front of the boy had somehow unchained one of his chains with metal wire. Hardrocks pushed David aside, and then kicked the Pagunian with all his might, throwing him out of his cell. When the sorcerer regained his balance, he reached for his goldenrod staff, but just as he was about to destroy Hardrocks, suddenly Bago began to swing his cage, which caused the bars to hit him straight in the head. Caliphate fell to the ground with a whine, and his staff shot up from his hand and landed directly under David's feet. The young man get down to lift the rod. "No. Don't do it," the terrified wizard howled, seeing the boy picking up his magical tool from the ground. "Don't you dare to do it, stupid little one. You're going to hurt yourself," he shouted a moment later, trying to avoid a terrible death. David, however, had no intention of listening to the cruel fanatic, and put his new weapon forward. "You're hurting yourself, stupid monster," said the boy, after which from the golden stick flashed waves of bright lighting, which hit directly into the body of the screaming sorcerer. Lightning began to throw him in all directions, until finally the man stopped screaming. After a while, from the clouds of rising smoke, the dead body of the burned man was revealed, which after a while fell to the ground with a bang. The riddled with holes, charred cassock of the unfortunate man hung uselessly on his body and burst with fire after a while. David looked at his golden stick and after a while found that it also had destroyed itself and that his hand had also been burned. However, he paid no attention to the unpleasant burning sting at all, but something quite different. "What do you mean again, military? Calm down." One of the guards suddenly became impatient, sitting at the table with his anxious friend. "But you haven't heard that. I think some noise comes from the dungeons. It's like a herd of bulls, see there," the dark-haired Pagunian replied to him. "I don't hear anything. Soon we will go to check what about our prisoners, and now it is better to enjoy the break," replied the second one, discarding just another of his cards, on a small table. "I don't play anymore, I'm going to see what's going on there." The first one finally got angry with the other one. "As you like, but I really don't know what you mean. These Evanescents have been sitting there for many hours and will in no way be able to escape. It is probably these brainless creatures, standing outside, that make so much noise. Our prisoners will not escape from the city in any way." So, the guard did not finish his speech, because he suddenly saw that his colleague was getting up from the bench, and then he began to walk down the corridor towards the dungeons. "Okay, I'm already going with you," mumbled reluctantly the other, following his companion. When the two of them were already in front of the prison door, suspicious noises could actually be heard inside, as if all the prisoners in tight bars had gone crazy and began to bump against the walls. "And I told you so? They've probably had enough of this confined space and want to break free," said the dark-haired soldier, and then he reached for the keys, attached to his belt. After a while, he put them in the lock to open the door, but when he did it, the noises inside suddenly died down. The worried guards, astonished by this fact, froze motionless. "Maybe we should go to our commander?" asked the dark-haired one. "It's better not to bother him. Let's go inside and see what's going on," replied his companion, pulling the handle. When he finally opened a heavy door and looked around the room, they suddenly saw that all of the cages were open, and there was no one inside. "How did they manage to escape? It's impossible," shouted the fair-haired man incredulously. "Watch out," Military shouted in response, but it was too late. The iron rod slammed straight into the guard's head, and after a while the same thing happened to the second of them. Nanthornian snatched the keys from the hands of one of the lying Pagurians, and then he ran first out of the dungeon, into a narrow corridor. The other escapees ran after the warrior and found themselves after a while in a small room, where just a moment ago two guards were playing cards calmly. Jalithessa immediately pointed out to her companions where the mysterious tunnel her father had once dug was. She knew that it was certainly there, that their weapons had been hidden, and that they would be able to escape from the underground. She threw herself straight into the big closet and tugged at its door to see what was inside.